That one glorious word represents more than just the geography between the Sabine and the Rio Grande. It represents a unique idea and way of life. A life of rugged individualism, proud self-reliance, gritty toughness, and fierce independence. That is what made Texas, and that is what will save her again. Howdy, folks. Sam Houston here. I want to thank you for tuning into the Feed Bandit podcast. Feed Bandit is the Texas first outdoors brand built by rabid Texans, for rabid Texans, and all those who aim to be one someday. We unapologetically promote the ideals that shape our Texas pride and Texas first patriotism through our love of hunting, the outdoors, and the gear and apparel we create. Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Check us out at feedbandit.com. And to repeat that great rallying cry from a former colleague of mine, liberty or death. Now, enough of my talking. Here are a couple of bandits that love Texas as much as I do. Enjoy.
Howdy, friend. Welcome back to the Feed Bandit podcast. Jimmy back with you. And today we're going to continue our series on Whitetail Strategies. Before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about Texas history, as I always tend to do on my podcasts here. Apologies ahead of time, as, man, this week, the week that I'm recording this, good Lord, if you're in Texas, you know about what the wind was like, and Jesus, where I am, it blew up something fierce in the air, and it is wreaking havoc with my allergies. So if I sound a little stopped up, that's exactly why. So sorry for breathing in through my nose, snorting like that as I'm talking. I know it's annoying. But as you're listening to this, it'll be several days after the day that I'm recording this, obviously. And the day that I'm recording this is March 6th, which is quite as you know, if you're a loyal listener to the Feed Bandit podcast, you will have listened to our General Houston's address about the fall of the Alamo, which occurred this morning, essentially, at sunrise. But just a couple of quick reminders about some Texas history here that I want to talk about is the day before, on March 5th, the Mexican army captured San Antonio. But this is not in 1836. Did you know that in 1842 this happened? So on this day, March 5th, 1842, amazingly enough, what is that? 6 years after the Texas Revolution and her winning independence, Mexican General Rafael Vasquez with 700 soldiers occupied San Antonio. Unable to raise an army in time to resist the invasion, the Texans surrendered and evacuated the town without a fight. Vasquez raised the Mexican flag over the town and declared Mexican laws in effect. On March 9th, the Mexican army abandoned San Antonio and began to withdraw to Mexico. The incident was part of a series of raids and counter-raids in 1842 as Mexico sought to recover Texas, and the Texans fought to maintain their independence. So I thought that was a little interesting piece of Texas history there. During the Republic days, it's not like, on April 21st, 1836, that everything just stopped and the Mexicans and the Texans respected each other. Respected the Rio Grande as the southern border and kind of moved on. That's not what happened. Obviously, if you remember from history books, the southern border was actually in dispute for a long time after Santa Anna surrendered to General Houston. Was it the Rio Grande? Was it the Nueces River? What was the southern border? And then, of course, you can see this Mexican general, Rafael Vasquez, had a little burr up his butt and did not like that. So he took his army in 1842 to capture San Antonio. Not staying long, obviously, but still, interesting piece of history. But as I mentioned, the day I'm recording this, March 6, 1836, the Alamo fell to the Mexican army. The fortified compound of San Antonio de Valero Mission, under siege for 13 days by the Mexican army under General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, was subjected to an early morning assault. After a first battle lasting for perhaps 90 minutes, the defenses of the Alamo were overrun and all the defenders were killed. The chapel fell last. The slogan, "Remember the Alamo," subsequently became a rallying cry for the Texas Revolution, and the Alamo became a shrine to fallen Texas heroes. It is always interesting and kind of somber when you visit the Alamo. Unfortunately, now it's closely surrounded by, stores full of crap and, just other weird things there in downtown San Antonio. But the Alamo itself is really a really cool place to visit if you never have. I would be surprised if anyone listening to this has never visited the Alamo, but if you haven't, make it a point to get down there. It's definitely something you got to do in your life for sure. But I mean, it's make a pilgrimage, if you will. Excuse me, the Mecca of Texas, if you want to call it that. So that's something definitely put on your list if you haven't done it, or if you haven't done it in a while, get down there. With that, we'll move on. Not to Whitetail Strategies just yet, but I wanted to make just a quick comment. And since I'm doing this solo, Old Corn Bandit's not on here, but I'll say he's told several stories about bobcats and hunting bobcats. He told his first bobcat story in a previous podcast. Let's see, that would be the podcast probably right before this, if I'm thinking of my order correctly. And I just wanted to quickly relay my first bobcat story. First time I actually ever saw a bobcat, believe it or not. But this was kind of crazy. I mean, not the hunt itself, but what kind of happened over 2 weekends. I went and I sat with Corn Bandit in a blind that we call a front 5-6. And we were sitting up there and we put out, not the old-fashioned tape recording deal, but I'm wondering if he remembers this. But I believe we did have a speaker, and maybe it was a Bluetooth type speaker or something. Man, I think this was in the low teens, maybe the upper aughts when this happened. And we're sitting in this blind, and sure enough, after the calls started, not, as I remember at least, not 10 minutes later, we look over and down the road to our left, a bobcat kind of comes down the road, but as you're looking at the road goes into some trees, so you can't kind of see past that point, and he comes out of those trees on the road and is just doodly-doodly-doo, walking down the road, just nonchalantly, looking around like, what is that noise? Where's it coming from? And I had my gun, I put it up, and my 243 is what I shot this one with. And bam, put him down. So that was really cool. Hopefully, Corn Bandit, if you're listening, and I know you are because you listen to every one of them. Do you remember that? Do you remember sitting with me for my first bobcat? We put it down. I have a picture of it, and it's funny when I look at that. I'm like, oh my god, it had to have been the 2000s, the aughts, or whatever you want to call it, maybe the upper aughts, because my beard was black, or not black, but brown. I didn't have any gray in it, and I'm wearing my sky camo shirt. So this is a sky camo shirt I got from was it Walls, and it was a long sleeve pearl snap shirt that looked like I was wearing clouds. It was like blue with clouds on it, basically. That shirt, I believe, is a medium. So if I was able to wear that shirt, that would have been definitely in the aughts, because now I'm full-blown extra large shirts. But Feed Bandit has recreated the sky camo pattern on one of our camp polos. So we got that. You can go check that out on our website. We'll be putting up better pictures of all these shirts very soon. So, hold off. We're going to run an interesting promotion as well. So, just be on the lookout for that if any of the shirts kind of interest you. We keep improving the site and things as much as we can, over time. So we got the shirts. We also have some newer cool hats out there. Check them out if you're interested or in the market for a new hat. And just stay tuned for more other gear that we're working on to bring out for you, and some other cool services that we want to provide. So, yeah, with that was my first. I was going to tell you the interesting thing about it is, so that was the first time I ever saw a bobcat. By the way, I shot that one, and we went back to Rancho Bandido the next weekend, sat in the same blind, and I think I was sitting. Who was I sitting with? Illini? I can't remember. Someone, or maybe I was by myself. I don't remember at this point. But did it again, and would you know it that a bobcat another one came out, okay, and it came out though from a kind of like a 11 o'clock angle, and he came out, and I was like, this is unbelievable. Am I going to get a shot at the second bobcat? So I pulled up my gun, and I shot. This time I think I had my 30-06. And I had to kind of do it quickly because he was kind of, I think if I remember correctly, he was kind of skittish and kind of going in circles, like kind of running around. And I shot, and I think he ran off, and I was like, I don't know, I probably didn't hit him because I'm in a 30-06 bullet, on a bobcat. But I was like, man, how did I? Because I never miss with this. I mean, I rarely ever miss with this gun. We looked and looked, didn't find him, unfortunately. But I mean, the rareness of 2 weekends in a row at the exact same spot of seeing a bobcat. What are the chances? So that was kind of interesting. So anyway, have you gotten a bobcat? I mean, we'd love to hear your story about your first bobcat sighting and or harvest. It's rare. Like since those 2 weekends, I think I've seen one bobcat out there. Now, granted, I don't call or do predator hunting that much. I should do it a lot more, as Corn Bandit admonishes us. In the off season, go do predator hunting. I saw one kind of quickly, running along the tree line, about 5 feet, and then it went back into the trees. One time we were driving around. That's about it. I've seen a lot more coyotes, shot a lot more coyotes, but yeah, the bobcats, don't see them very often. So, but I got that first guy mounted, and he's on my bookshelf behind me here in the Feed Bandit Studios. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Had to get that thing, of course, mounted. He's in a stalking position, so got that one going. But yeah, I'd love to hear about your bobcat stories if you got any. So send them to howdy at feedbandit.com. Excuse me. God, when my nose is stopped up, it's hard to talk. I mean, I have trouble talking regardless, but yeah, it makes it even harder when you can't breathe or barely breathe out of one of your nostrils. All right, with that, let's get on to Whitetail Strategies. All right, continuing with our series Whitetail Strategies, we're going to start talking about a chapter called How to Use Deer Calls Effectively. This one's kind of long, so I'm going to break it up to at least two podcasts, maybe 3. So we'll see. Let's just get going and see what we can get in on this one. Okay, again, how to use deer calls effectively. The rhythmic sounds of the buck moving steadily through fallen leaves were only overshadowed by the noise of snapping branches as he trotted along the riverbed. Now the big buck was in sight, and I could plainly hear the guttural grunts as he was making every few seconds. His big white rack glistened as he trotted toward my stand. He was moving so quickly that I thought he would trot right by me without offering me a good shot. I took out my grunt call and blew an extended, soft doe grunt. The buck skidded to a halt and glanced up at me as I pulled the trigger. 30 years ago, this chapter probably would not have caught your attention, and for a very good reason. You probably would not have believed deer calls worked. Using calls to attract deer back in the 60s was a well-kept secret used only by the old, savvy woodsmen who hunted the remote wildernesses wilderness areas of the country. These old-timers rarely talked about the effectiveness of using doe bleats, but quietly and consistently, they used these rudimentary calls made of rubber bands and balsa wood to regularly attract whitetails. It was just such an old-timer who first introduced me to deer calls. During my second deer season, I was hunting in Childwood, New York, which is in the Adirondack Mountains. I was sitting on a stand overlooking a swamp. Every so often I heard a lamb-like sound. I honestly did not know what the sound was or what was making it. But I did know that about every 15 minutes, the sound emanated 100 yards or so from a dip below the ledge I was sitting on. Since this was only my second year of deer hunting, my patience level wasn't fine-tuned. If I didn't see a deer within the first hour or two, I usually got up and skulked around hoping to jump a buck. To this day, I often smile when I think about those patience-less days. It never seemed to fail. No sooner did I get up and start walking around when I would hear a gunshot ring out close by me. I must have unknowingly driven a lot of bucks to many hunters in those days. In any event, by 7:30 that morning, my patience was gone, and I was determined to go check out what was making this lamb-like noise. Just as I stood up to gather my gear, I heard the noise again. This time, I also heard a similar noise coming from the swamp. I thought to myself, what the hell did I do? Did I unsuspectingly post on the border of a lamb farm on the other side of the swamp? Just then, a big doe emerged from the swamp and trotted toward the ledge above me. Never swerving, she was determined to reach the source of the noise. I watched as she stopped and then began pacing nervously back and forth. Then the excitement started. Right behind her, from the swamp, ran 2 bucks. I started shaking and tried to decide which one to shoot, when a gunshot rang out. The bigger of the 2 bucks dropped in its tracks. I threw my .30-30 to my shoulder and tried to draw a bead on the second buck as it and the doe weaved and darted through the surrounding mature hardwoods. I never pulled the trigger. Naturally, I was pretty shocked at what had just happened. As I sat there disgusted, I saw a hunter who was posted well below me stand and approach the downed buck. I grabbed my gear and went down to talk to him. This old gentleman was the source of the doe bleat I was hearing all that morning. He told me how he used doe blats for years to attract whitetails, especially from heavy cover like the swamp we were overlooking. He busted out into laughter with tears in his eyes when I told him I thought I posted near a sheep farm. Well, there ain't no sheep or a farm between Childwood and Tupper Lake, and they're 30 miles apart. He laughed as he held his belly. While the old-timer field-dressed the 8-point buck, I stood there in amazement as he told story after story of how successful he had been over the years using a blat call. Hell, boy, if you want to kill bucks like this, learn to blow one of these here doe calls, he said, and the old gent placed an old deer call in my hand. Your friends will think you're crazy for using it, he said, but I can bet you it'll work. That was my introduction to deer calling. I bought an old call that afternoon in a tiny general store in Tupper Lake during a heavy snowfall. I blew it on almost every hunting trip that season without success. However, I didn't give up. The memory of that morning's hunt and the old gent's stories remained vivid within me, so I continued to use and practice the doe blat call. By 1970, I was a much better deer caller, having learned to use a variety of calls other than the blat and even called in and shot a few bucks. I knew I was onto something and promised myself that, through trial and error, I would gain experience and confidence and become an accomplished caller. Hunters have long benefited from knowing how to use artificial calls to attract wildlife. A good example is elk hunters who have enjoyed the success of rattling, bugling, or mewing bulls and cows for many years. Moose, duck, wild turkey, coyote, and many other game animals have also been successfully enticed in by sportsmen who made it their business to learn effective calling techniques to attract a variety of wildlife. But deer hunters are reluctant to try calls to attract whitetails. Unfortunately, these outdoorsmen are missing out on one of Mother Nature's natural seductions. By learning how, why, where, and when to use deer calls, you will increase your success ratio. All 30 species and subspecies of deer in the Americas are vocal animals. Whitetail, mule, and black-tailed deer, for example, which cover a broad range on the continent, respond readily to calling. Biologists have confirmed and categorized 13 different types of vocalizations made by whitetails. Since I began deer hunting in 1965, I have taken 113 whitetail bucks. So he wrote this, I don't know, probably 20, 30 years ago. So not sure how long he lived, but I'm sure he harvested a lot more than that after that. Approximately half of these bucks were shot after I imitated deer sounds. Calling to deer has been one of the easiest methods I've ever used to trick white-tailed deer to my stand. The secret to being a successful caller is the same as I've discussed in earlier chapters: confidence. Knowing your call sounds authentic and believing in its effectiveness is critical to your success. Confidence can mean the difference between seeing and actually bagging game. A few years ago, I received a letter from a Woods and Water TV show viewer who also read many of my articles. An avid deer hunter, Chuck German, first decided to use deer calls after reading an article I wrote. In his letter, he told me he was skeptical, as most novice callers are, and how in his first year calling he didn't harvest a deer. In his second season, however, after spending the summer and spring practicing, German called in several good bucks. By practicing, he gained confidence, and it paid big dividends for him. Practice is the name of the game when it comes to deer calling. A good caller carries several different types of calls and uses them throughout the year. Whenever you see deer, no matter what time of year it is, call to them. Learn what types of calls make them curious, alarmed, relaxed, or nervous. The best time to test the effectiveness of calls is in the spring and summer when deer are vocal and not harassed by hunting pressure. In the spring, does are vocal when they give birth to fawns. These vocalizations are crucial to the fawn survival and include feeding, alarm, locating, and other types of calls to help the fawn in its day-to-day survival. You can effectively replicate several types of deer vocalizations. Snorts, which is what I'm doing a lot right now, blats, bleats, grunts, whistles, and barks can all be used to lure deer to your stand, just like rattling. The 4 calls that will bring you the most success, however, are also the easiest to learn: the alarm snort, the burp grunt, doe and buck, the loud blat, and the social bleat. There are several keys to successful calling. First, an experienced deer caller learns to blow all calls softly. Occasionally, a louder, more aggressive call may be necessary, but overall, louder, aggressive sounding calls will scare away more deer, including big bucks, than they will attract. Although you have read and heard to the contrary, common sense applies here. Many of you have told me repeatedly that while using grunt calls, you have had varied success. Sometimes they attract bucks and sometimes they don't. Invariably, the next question is, why? There are many reasons why grunts and other calls work well sometimes and not others. Most times, however, negative response is generated after a grunt is blown too loudly and aggressively. Let's take an average size 8-pointer walking up a trail with his nose held to the ground. Suddenly, he hears your loud, aggressive grunt. Basically, what you've just done is yelled at the top of your lungs, "Hey, you!" You just scared the crap out of the poor buck. What happens next is automatic. Out of instinct, he glances in your direction and realizes he made a critical mistake by attempting to make eye contact with a more aggressive animal. Immediately, he avoids a confrontation by looking away and continuing to walk without looking back. No matter how long or hard you grunt at a buck under these conditions, he will not respond. Why should he? Through your loud and aggressive call, you just announced that you're unquestionably the biggest, baddest buck in the woods. If he has any sense at all, even if he is a big buck, he'll avoid the fight and walk off. If by now you doubt that, go back and reread the chapter on rattling and fighting behavior. Make your calls softly and you'll be more successful. All right. Soft and successful. S&S. Just remember that. I'll write that down so we can remember that for sure. Soft and successful. Notice how I'm emphasizing that on the podcast so that you can remember as well. The next most common reason for lack of success when calling is calling too much. When you're calling, you're no longer hunting the buck. He's hunting you. So it's important that while you're trying to gain his attention by vocalizing, you don't want to talk so much that he pinpoints your location or becomes wary due to the unnatural frequency of your numerous calls. Limit the number of calls you make to within common sense parameters. Another reason for unsuccessful calling is calling to an animal that has responded to a call and is walking toward you. Once a buck responds and walks to you, stop calling. Let his curiosity work for instead of against you. But that said, there are many cadences to each of the primary vocalizations. Learn and practice them, and you will add another potent weapon to your deer hunting arsenal. All right. So let's talk about the snort. Because the snort call represents, to most hunters, a deer fleeing, it is the most misunderstood and hardly ever used call. The snort vocalization has several meanings to deer. When you can decipher what each call means, you'll be very surprised at how effective each snort cadence is. There are 4 cadences to the primary snort: the alarm call, the alarm distress, the social snort, and the aggressive snort. Each of these calls has specific meaning and is used during certain situations. When you use a snort at the right time and under the correct set of circumstances, you can trick your quarry into thinking you're another deer. Use the wrong snort cadence under the wrong circumstances, however, and your deer snorting will turn itself inside out trying to avoid you. Excuse me, I butchered that. And the deer you're snorting to will turn itself inside out trying to avoid you. Don't you love how I don't edit out screw-ups like that? Let's see. The alarm snort. The alarm snort is frequently heard by most hunters. I could even tell you when and where you probably encountered a deer making this cadence of the alarm snort. Often, a hunter walking along a logged road or making his way through the woods to a stand jumps a deer. Because the deer does not win the hunter first, it only reacts to the hunter's noise. I know you've heard this snort often. This deer, buck or doe, can be called back if you know what to do. When you encounter a deer unexpectedly, the deer may respond by blowing a single snort, then run several yards, stop, and blow a second single snort. Woof, woof. It is alarmed, but has not been able to pinpoint why. The deer is trying to locate and isolate the danger. By blowing back at the deer with an alarm snort call, you will stimulate the deer's curiosity. Often it decides to slowly make its way back towards the location where it first encountered the perceived danger. When you jump a deer that blows the alarm snort, wait until the deer has blown the second snort. Then, place the call in your mouth and blow hard once. Hesitate about 2 seconds and blow the call again. Do not blow the call a third time until the deer snorts back. Once the deer answers you, respond to it with 2 more snorts. Keep doing this as long as you hear the deer approaching and snorting. Several years ago, I snorted at a buck 57 times. Each time the buck answered with a snort of his own. I was convinced I was calling to a wise old buck. As the tension mounted, I became more and more convinced that this was a really big buck. Finally, the buck emerged from the pines, and I was surprised to see he was a small 6-point buck. I shot him anyway. Years ago, my wife Kate shot her first buck while still hunting toward her tree stand. As she approached the stand, she saw a deer. She tried to position herself for a shot, and she stepped on a branch. The deer heard the snap and blew an alarm snort. It ran off several yards, then blew a second snort. Kate blew back at the deer, and the buck answered. Each time the deer blew 2 snorts, Kate blew back 2 snorts. The buck, curious to see what had frightened it, kept coming closer to her with each series of alarm snorts. Finally, after several minutes of exchanging snorts to one another, the spike buck made its last move when it stepped out from behind the cedars, and Kate dispatched him with 1 clean shot. Kate would have never had the opportunity to shoot that buck if she didn't know enough to call back to the snorting buck. All variations of the snort work well. You will find, however, the alarm snort to be the easiest snort to learn and use. However, the critical aspect when using a snort call is to not blow the alarm snort to a deer who is vocalizing an alarm distress. You must know the different cadences of each call for them to be effective. I often use the alarm snort when bow hunting. Intentionally, I'll walk through heavy cover with the wind in my face. Every few steps I snap a twig or kick some leaves. I do this with the hopes of alarming a buck with the noise I'm making. Notice, I have taken 13 Pope and Young bucks. Half of them have been taken from the ground. Half of those have been taken while using this strategy. Oh, okay. I guess that is his proof. Pardon that if you hear my dog barking. Once I alarm a buck and he makes the alarm snort cadence of the primary snort, I know I have a better than average chance to call the buck back. I call this cadence of the primary snort my too late call. As the buck and I exchange calls, he usually approaches without knowing I'm hidden in heavy brush or pines, and he continues to walk by me in search of the other deer. Quote unquote. I shot a few nice bucks at distances less than 10 yards while using this tactic. The trick here is as the buck gets closer, you should blow the call more softly and in the opposite direction of the approaching deer. This makes the buck think the, quote, other deer is walking away, and it often concentrates on nothing else other than trying to locate the, quote, other deer. Alarm distress. Another effective snort cadence is the alarm distress call. This is my favorite snort cadence. Okay, let's learn about that. Here's how to use the alarm distress call when hunting with companions. Locate thick cover like a cedar patch or a swamp, and then post hunters along the network of trails that are known deer escape routes. The trick here is to set hunters up on the outer fringes of the cover along escape routes. Don't be tempted to have them penetrate too deeply into the center of the cover. After all the standers are posted, wait a good half hour for things to settle down. Then walk into the middle of the thickest part of the cover without trying to be too quiet. When you've reached where you want to be, take out an interdigital scent and lay down several drops. Then, stomp your foot several times while blowing the alarm distress cadence of the primary snort. The call sounds like this. Whew, 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 whew. Let's see if I did that right. Make the first 3 snorts loud and hesitate about a second between each sound. Well, I did a little too fast then. Then make the next 4 snorts without any hesitation. No, I did that right if I did the next 4 without hesitation. So make the next 4 snorts without any hesitation. As you've read throughout this book, always try to create as natural a display as possible when calling or rattling. I know this is repetitive, but drilling it into your head is crucial to your success. Try to duplicate the complete illusion of what deer would do when they are vocalizing or fighting. Make an all-out effort to create all the sounds, smells, like using interdigital scent when blowing the alarm distress, and motions, shaking brush or saplings, that deer make when they are vocalizing or fighting. By doing this, it helps to put the deer at ease when it responds. Inevitably, the deer thinks it is hearing, smelling, and sometimes seeing other deer. Therefore, it responds more enthusiastically and with less caution. The alarm distress is used also when you're hunting alone. I've had the most success with this cadence of the snort when I use it hunting by myself. I use it to rouse deer from cattails, ledges, brush piles, small woodlots, laurels, and from standing agricultural fields. For instance, when hunting a farm with a field of standing corn, most hunters instinctively feel, or perhaps even know, there is a buck hiding within the standing crop. Here's how to convince the buck it's time to leave the security of the hideout. Pick a corner of the cornfield where the last 2 rows of corn meet. Find some cover with the wind blowing towards you. Put out extra amounts, maybe several drops, of interdigital scent. Then, make the same scenario of calls and stomps I described above. Often, only minutes after making the first call, you'll hear deer stalking through the corn looking for a safe exit point. Once they've found what they believe is a good escape route, they traditionally poke their heads out of the corn, glance back and forth as if looking for traffic, and make a determined effort to the nearest cover. Usually, it's an adjoining woodlot. When the buck leaves the corn and carefully picks its way along the edges before going into the woodlot, is when you get your best shot. For me, carrying the snort call has created numerous hunting opportunities. Without it, many deer would still be safely hidden within the sanctuaries of cover I regularly come across hunting. The social snort. And actually, maybe we'll save the social snort for the next podcast. What do you say? We've already gone over 30 minutes on this one, and we try to like to keep them about 30 minutes. Maybe the equivalent of your commute to work or whatever, what have you, on your daily routine. So we'll make that the part 2 of deer calls. How about that? Plus, my nose is running like a river, so I gotta tend to that as well. So anyway, I hope you're enjoying the podcast in general, but also this Whitetail Strategies series. That's interesting. Like, I hunt almost exclusively whitetail out of deer blinds here. So, and I never really use deer calls. But what I can tell you, even after reading the first third of this chapter, is that I'm going to invest in some deer calls for sure. And I'm going to take some of those out into the field, into maybe some ground blinds. Probably even do it in deer stands. Maybe kind of lean it outside the window and see what you can do. But I'm definitely going to attempt that in this coming deer season. So I'm excited to learn more about the other calls that he's going to talk about in this chapter. So I hope you are too. So stick around for that. I imagine we'll get back to the Whitetail Strategies within a week or so to complete this chapter, or at least get to part 2 of it. So anyway, with that, let's see. When you first able to listen to this, we'll be well into March, getting closer to turkey season. So we'll be talking more about turkey hunting strategies, turkey strategies as well. I'm really looking forward to that. Let's see. I believe opening weekend is the 31st, or the opening day, I should say. Let's look it up here. Turkey season. Opening day is, oh, look at that. Okay, here's what it is. It is, depending on your zone, of course. Turkey. Where are you? Turkey. So if you're in the north, that's March 29th to May 11th. If you're in the south zone, March 15th to April 27th. Okay, great. So where I would be going, oh man, excuse me. Where I'd be going is to the north zone. So what is it? Man. All right. Okay. I'm excited. So that's only 1, 2, 3. Well, from recording, it's 3 weeks. By the time you hear this, 2 weeks or less. So super excited. So let's get out there and get some turkeys. Keep studying up on deer, so that next year you'll have a lot more tools in your toolbox, and we'll give those to you through this Whitetail Strategies series. So I really appreciate you listening. And what do we always say? Support your local feed store and support Texas. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Take care.
Well, I hope the Bandits gave you an interesting episode that either entertained or educated you. Or better yet, both. Hell, I told them this podcasting thing looks harder to do than defeating Santa Ana. So if you would, please help them out by sharing it with all your like-minded friends to help the Bandits get the word out. And don't forget to check us out at feedbandit.com and grab some gear and apparel to support the cause of Texas. Remember, Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Finally, as I said some time ago on the eve of the great battle, and I vigorously repeat here again, be men, be free men, that your children may bless their father's name. Well, fellow bandit, until next time.